Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Amanda,
I'm Laura.
And I'm Kendra.
and today is a very big day. Mark it down. This is one of Laura's favorite days. I'm going to let her take it away.
Oh my gosh. Yes, you guys. I am so excited to introduce you to Tony Overbay, licensed marriage and family therapist, coach, podcast host of The Virtual Couch, and my personal favorite podcast, Waking Up to Narcissism. He also hosts an awesome podcast with his daughter, Murder on the Couch, which honestly I've listened to. It was so good, but it was too advanced for me. I think I see too much actual crime at work. I was like, can't.
That's fair. Okay.
Too scary. So anyway, he's an ultra marathoner, husband and dad, and just a great person. I just met him today, but I know this from listening to his podcast. I first heard Tony in an interview on a leadership podcast where he was discussing narcissism, and I was like, oh, I got to go find out what this podcast is about. And I was immediately hooked, went right on over to Waking Up to Narcissism. I think I've listened to almost all of those episodes, and they have been like, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, they've been transformational for me, truly. So for those of us who grew up in homes with substance abuse, personality disorders, or really any level of dysfunction. So yeah, probably all of us, his podcast is just transformational. It really is. That's not an exaggeration. And I've shared it with lots of people, in particular, some of my colleagues at work, and they're just like, whoa, mind blown. So Tony, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Okay, thank you. The introduction is always the most awkward part, right? Because you put all the nice things in your bio and then you start to buy into it yourself. And then you realize, man, if these guys really knew me or figured me out, that whole imposter syndrome thing, because you're real doctors. I mean, I'm intimidated today. And because if somebody actually calls me a doctor, I have to go, okay, do I correct them? Because it is kind of fun to hear that. But you're real doctors. And if somebody says, is there a doctor on a plane? Then you actually have to do things, right?
Yeah, we do, but that's okay. We're all humans. Just own it. You're doing really great work. Yes. We appreciate you.
That is one thing that we try to work on is we all get to shine. So you being a doctor doesn't take away from me being a doctor, vice versa. And so you get to be the amazing person that you are and own it.
Look at you guys all build me up. And to be fair, Amanda, I'm actually not a doctor. So that's the fun part when somebody does call me one. But so I always think, okay, if they write it on my check, though, then, I make a photocopy of it. And then I hope that my bank takes it. And
Tony,
that's been kind of funny. Yeah.
You are a doctor of narcissism. Okay. Narcissism
I'll take that.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
There we go.
It's an honorary degree for sure. At least Laura is giving you for sure. So yes,
I will take that. Those honorary degrees. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
I'm
why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you wound up becoming a therapist?
Yeah. So, and I'll try to make this brief, but I did a decade in computer software and and this actually starts to play into the whole concepts of emotional immaturity and the way we show up as humans and in relationships. But I jumped into that career and I didn't actually know I could enjoy a career. So I'm years into that career and it was this is what you do and you grind it out and then you live for the evenings and weekends. But I didn't enjoy it. And so sometimes when I like to talk about the concepts of a healthy ego versus pathological defensive narcissism, I like to give this example of my days in the computer industry. I was so insecure that I had to put out this facade that I was special, that I knew everything, not knowing that I was putting out there, for people that actually knew things. They were aware that I didn't know the intricacies of computer programming and where the primary defect list was on a magnetic optical drive or whatever. But I would say things like, "Oh, I know these things because I have to be special." And so then, one small pinprick would deflate my fragile ego, and then all of a sudden I'm into this defensive mode of how dare you. And so then when I find the career that I actually like as a therapist, and all of a sudden, oh, I love this, and I eat it up, and I want to know more. And so healthy ego is, based off of things that you actually do or your real accomplishments. And I love the concept of where the more that you actually then realize the things that you do know, then what comes along with that is I can take ownership of the things I don't know. And then that starts to build some trust and relationships. And you get to say things like, oh, I don't know, instead of, well, I bet this is the case, that kind of thing. So there's my tangent number one. But I was doing this career I didn't really care for. I felt this almost calling, that old cliche to help people. And I would speak at trade shows and I would find myself getting through the presentation and then just interacting with people coming to the booth or the people setting up the booth. And so I was that guy. And then I also wrote a humor column in a newspaper for about a decade. And when my wife started having kids, there were a lot of dad books. There was a Paul Reiser fatherhood book, and there were a couple others that were just funny compilations of fatherhood stories. So I was putting those in my column. And then I thought, I think it'd be fun to write a book. And then I think well, and I know we'll talk about this later, I confabulated a narrative that I had to have letters behind my name to write a book. So then I thought I should probably go back to grad school. I'll get my master's degree and I'll just write books. And then I go back to grad school and I fall in love with the program and actually get good grades, which I didn't really do very well in my undergrad. And so I realized if you like something, you do want to know more about it. So then I just started slowly but surely getting into being a therapist. I was still doing computer things for a long time. I was doing part-time therapy. And then slowly but surely, I just started to make therapy more of what I do. And then that was the best decision I ever made in my entire life. So I love everything about it. So now I write and podcast and speak and see a bunch of clients, and I love it. So that's kind of I was going to say short version, but not so short. But I hope that answers the question.
That was great. That was perfect. So now let's get into it. What sparked your interest in narcissism and inspired you to start the podcast?
Okay, so this is where I think there's this joke or cliche that therapists get into therapy to work on themselves. And I thought, well, not me. I just enjoy this, or again, just want to write books. And so then fast forward a few years and I've been seeing more and more clients. And then I really did feel this calling to work with men. And then my joke is that then when I started working in the field, that you learn that men don't come into counseling. So then I thought, okay, well, I guess that we'll change courses. But I was doing my internship with a nonprofit for my church. And so they handed me people that were struggling with what they would say pornography addiction and faith crisis and things like that. So now I get guys coming in. And even though pornography addiction isn't a real diagnosis, but there's like impulse control disorder, compulsive behaviors. But I get people coming in and then they're coming in with a lot of shame, which I think, Kendra, you did that episode on shame, which you want to hear what narcissism looks like, though, a little bit? When I was going to start binging on your guys' stuff, I listened to that. I'm like, oh, I wonder if this is about me, and then it's Brene Brown. That's okay, though. I was okay with that. But so then I'm getting guys coming in and it's like, okay, porn. And then I was saying, okay, I did a little bit of time where knock it off, hadn't thought of that one, sing a hymn or do some push-ups and then, those behavioral things. And that really wasn't very helpful. And so then I started kind of taking my own approach and I started looking at it as I felt like people turned to any unhealthy coping mechanism when they didn't feel connected in their marriage or their parenting, their faith, their career, their health. So then I think, okay, well, I need to go find ways to deal with all these. So I go find a couples modality, emotionally focused therapy. And because I never was going to be a couples therapist, and I find a nice individual modality, this acceptance and commitment therapy that was a game changer for me personally. And this parenting technique called the nurtured heart and faith crisis. I'm diving on Valor stages of faith. And so all these things. And then I start getting some success. People are coming in and saying, but what about the porn? I'm like, right, let's get you back to, be a better husband, be a better father. So now I'm doing couples work. And I went from, I would hate if I saw 2 couples on my schedule to now I'm seeing 20, 25 couples a week. And so now that I have actual tools and I'm enjoying the couples work, some of them just didn't hit right. You could hand somebody tools and then it's like drinking from a fountain in the desert and this is so great. And I have all my now cliches of people don't know what they don't know. Nobody comes from the factory with the right tools to communicate, all those things, sitting with discomfort and validation, all the therapy things. But then sometimes it just didn't work. And then the one person, and often it's the guy. There's also women that fall into this category, but the guy would get in there and continually tell me, hey, hang on, old man, like you'll throw those tools away when you hear how crazy she is, and then she's coming in and saying, I must be the crazy one because I keep trying and the goalposts keep moving, but it's got to be me. And so I start seeing that dynamic. And then I think, okay, this is starting to get very consistent. And then I start the Virtual Couch podcast. This is 7 years ago and it's episode 4. I think I'm trying to get anybody that will come on that has a book or that sort of thing, and now I get somebody's publicist every day trying to get them on. And, now that's like, oh, I'll send them to my assistant. But at that time I'm begging people to come on, and I get an author named Tina Fuller with a book called It's My Turn. And it's about growing up with a narcissistic mother. And I feel like I won't ever allow myself to go back and listen. I don't like hearing myself, but I've always wondered if I go back in that one, am I like, I can only imagine me going, and then what did you do? Like, oh no, and almost like it's personal therapy or that sort of thing. And so then she and I ended up talking a little bit off the air. And so then I start just digging into narcissism a little bit more. And then all of a sudden you go through that period where, is everyone a narcissist? My wife said that I was calling everybody one. And I'm like, but what if they are? And then I do the whole, wait, I am. And then honest to goodness, this is where then it's like, oh, I am doing this career to fix myself. And maybe I think I'm grateful for it. And then I start looking at, oh, I have these narcissistic traits and tendencies. I'm not a narcissist, I don't think, but I've got these traits and tendencies. So then I start putting that out into the Virtual Couch podcast, and I get my own clients. And then now I start getting traction, and people are emailing me and on a regular basis. And they're saying, hey, and it's hilarious how you talk about your traits and tendencies. I'm like, well, is it though? And then I realized that all the therapy I'm doing and sitting in with sessions, I'm like, oh crap, I do that. And then I'm going home to my wife, do I do this? And, when she'd say maybe a little bit, and then I'm like, how dare you? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's that fragile ego. I'm wanting to gaslight her now, and so it's this journey that I'm so grateful for to be a part of, or I would be a total jerk at this point. And so then I start thinking about the Waking Up to Narcissism podcast. This is 4 or 5 years into it. And so then I honest to goodness, at one point, I swear I was going to call it like Narcissist in Recovery. But then I thought, I don't like that one. But I was very intentional about waking up to narcissism, because it's waking up to the narcissistic traits, tendencies in your relationship with maybe your spouse or your parent or your adult child or your religious institution or your boss or anything, or it's those traits and tendencies within yourself. And I'll take a break here and a breath and I promise. But then I very intentionally, like 8 or 9 episodes in, I do one on, are you the narcissist? Because that's what I keep everybody saying, am I? And first of all, I say, if you're even asking yourself if you are, you're not, because then you wouldn't even be thinking about that. You would just be a narcissist. And so then I lay out that narcissistic personality disorder is, 2 to 4% of the population, if you really look at the diagnostic criteria. And so we can't be calling everybody a narcissist if that's the percentage. So then I introduced this concept that I was working with in my office of emotional immaturity, and how we're all emotionally immature until we're not. And if you're given the right tools, that's where you really see, okay, is this just something that we didn't know? Or is this person incapable of, playing in the same sandbox? And then and now here we are. So there's how that all happened.
Well, that's a perfect transition, because we all learned about narcissistic personality disorder in psychiatry rotations and psychology.
What did you
classes.
learn? Like, I want to know so bad. Like, what is the medical community? What do you guys look at that as?
I mean, it's just like bad.
Bad.
That guy's a narcissist. I don't know what to do about it, but like
you can't operate or anything like that, right? Lobotomy, is that where that comes in, or no?
Yeah.
Right. Well, they do teach us that personality disorders are far more difficult than like a chemical imbalance sort of thing to try to treat. That's just kind of ingrained. And I mean, that's where it left off in my human behavior class, is like, wow, this is just kind of how people are. It didn't go any step further. Did you guys?
Right. But I also think it's not talked about because of the defensiveness, just like you said. It is so defensive. Like, as soon as you even sniff it out, or like even go, it's just like shut down because it's so rampant.
Well, and Kendra, when you say rampant, this is where I was so pumped to talk to you guys, and I want you on all of my podcasts, and I want us to be best friends. I want you to come on a regular basis. But I work with a lot of people, and the more that my podcast has gotten out there, it's the real special people at times that want to meet with me. At that point, it's like, no, I want the best, and I'll pay whatever, and you don't understand. I would like to meet with you, please. I've listened to your podcast, right? And that's why I want to say, well, okay, I get 20 of those a day, and they're like, okay, well, money's no, I mean, you see the narcissism in the people that are trying to then meet with me, so that then they can say that they're meeting with the narcissist expert, which that's fascinating. But I remember I also get the pathologically kind people that are in your field. And so I still remember this so much, where one time I was talking to a person, and they work in a OR, and they were talking about working with this really narcissistic surgeon, and we're talking about these things. And I remember saying, okay, but is that the one place though that you would like that narcissism? And then this person, and it made so much sense. They said, well, no, because they're not going to, he's like, they don't take ownership of if something does go wrong. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly right. So they may have that confidence that, oh, I can do all, but then if something happens, well, that wasn't my fault. What was I supposed to do? And I thought, whoa, that's mind blowing. So I want to know all of your opinions on that. Maybe I don't know if it's today or in my podcast or both, but that's why I like what you're saying, Kendra. If it's so rampant, it's like, I can't imagine what that's like.
My experience in the second year of med school was I had everything. And my own personal one was like, do I have schizoid personality disorder? Like what? Am or do I just like maybe not like crazy people all the time? I don't
know. Tell me more about that. Yeah, this is,
exactly,
and it turns out this is an intervention. Thank you, Kendra and Laura, Amanda.
Oh no, got me on this thing. Okay, all right, redirecting back.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay, so narcissistic personality disorder. But you're saying that there's a spectrum of narcissism. Are you able to explain to us what narcissism is or emotional immaturity is for the listeners?
Absolutely. And here's, I make no secrets about my adult ADHD diagnosis. So spectrum of narcissism, I mean, that does sound like a great name for an alternative band. I mean, I just want to kind of put that out there. Right? Okay. So here's where, so narcissistic personality disorders, like I'm saying, I wanted to make this intentional move that isn't, it isn't as much of the population as we think it is, or if you listen to social media or that sort of thing. So I really say, okay, so narcissism or emotional immaturity, if I'll go ahead and look at it, and it's such a mouthful, and I want to come up with my own IP around what a person who is maybe has narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic traits and tendencies, or is an emotionally immature person. So there's the mouthful. That person, it's kind of like this complex set of defense mechanisms. And so they're a reaction to somebody growing up in an environment where there wasn't enough support for stable self-esteem. So then that person develops a reliance on external validation to even exist, to make themselves feel better. So they always need that supply or somebody to engage with in order to just have a sense of self. So, they can't sit with their own self or ego, or because it gets uncomfortable, because they never had a chance to develop a sense of self growing up, because it's typically been this modeled behavior of watching their parent not take ownership of anything, or if they did do something that humans do, make a mistake or get in trouble, then they really paid for it. So then you often hear this concept that gaslighting is a childhood defense mechanism. So if you kind of look at it that way, then you've got this. So if they grow up with this unstable environment, they need external validation to even feel like they exist. That's going to lead to people having a lower amount of empathy, because they can't sit with somebody else's feelings or emotions because it makes them uncomfortable. And so they got to get rid of that discomfort. And so that's where I feel like you've got this spectrum of emotional immaturity, where if they weren't modeled it, then, it's hard to then say, okay, then they're incapable of it, because, and I'll go into something in a minute that I think is important too. But I feel like that's the part where, back to the podcast, I made a very big intentional move, not only to the name, but then also I feel like when somebody reads about narcissism, I over exaggerate this for humor, I think, but they read the word and then it's like the book says, don't finish the paragraph, pack your things and leave. Like, it'll never get better. And then I realized, and actually working with human beings that have feelings and emotions, kids, rites of passage, social capital, groups, financial ties, that nobody can do that. So now you're already telling the person who's starting to go, oh my gosh, this is a thing. And then it gives them more shame. And so you got this pathologically nice and kind person that's in this, almost this breakup resistant relationship, who just read, you got to get out. So then it's like, that's uncomfortable. So it can't be them. It must be me then. So then I get the people coming to me and they're like, what can I do? So then I say, I've got to meet somebody where they're at. And so then I kind of initially developed these, and I don't have cool names for these, and I need to, but these 5 things or ways of interacting with people in narcissistic or emotionally mature relationships, which is it's number 1 is raise your emotional baseline, which is self-care, because you got to get yourself in a good position to even be able to handle all these things around you. And quick tangent. So emotional baseline theory is one that I made up, 12, 13 years ago. And it was with working with a doctor that I loved working with, who was in now I realize, a horribly narcissistic relationship with his wife, who wanted nothing to do with anything that he would talk about, but please continue to bring large sums of money in, but don't talk about it, do more around the house. And, so he was coming to therapy, and he would wait for 5 minutes at the end of every session. He said, just ask me questions. I just like to talk about this. And at the time I was getting into the height of my ultra running career. So I would just bring in all kinds of nutrition questions and, hydration. And I was learning as I was getting into the ultra marathon distances, hyponatremia and balances of electrolytes. And he could just go on. And one day I didn't prepare, and I'm driving in, and this is back when younger listeners at the radio, and I heard an advertisement on the radio for an antidepressant, and they go into the warnings at the end, 1,000,000 miles an hour, but it's like may cause suicidal ideation. And I was like, okay, I've never really thought about that one. So I bring in to the doctor, I said, why can an antidepressant cause suicidal ideation? And then he goes on to this story about growing up in a cold area of Idaho where it was so cold it didn't didn't snow. And then it's this state of like weather anhedonia, and that then people, when they're in the state of anhedonia, they're so flat that then he said that if you put an antidepressant in their mouth for 3 weeks, then eventually they'll lift their head up and realize, oh, everything sucks. I think I want to kill myself. And he's like, so you got to hurry up and get them up to this place where they're like, okay, life isn't good, but I can do something about it. And that just hit me with this aha moment of this baseline of emotions. And so the more that you're feeling gaslit and like you're crazy and everything you try and do gets worse, then I feel like your emotional baseline lowers and lowers, but all these decisions you have to make are coming at you every day from the same place. So when I start working with somebody, it's like, just raise your baseline a little bit of self-care. And that it doesn't mean you have to go run a marathon, but you might need to dream or hope or listen to podcasts or start to read or, and it'll bump it up a little bit. And at some point you're going to get some traction. And now I can start to be and do, and I can start to, unfortunately what comes next is stand up for myself, which then the narcissist is like, oh, thank you, for the supply. So now I'll engage in more of the gaslighting. But anyway, so the raise your baseline. And then I say, get your PhD in gaslighting, get out of unproductive conversations, learn to set healthy boundaries. And for better or worse at the time, know that a boundary is a challenge for a narcissist. And at some point, it's like the person starts to shift over where, oh, okay, I'm noticing now that he's pushing more and more buttons. I must be doing it right, even though the buttons are bad. I'll tell everybody, I'll pit the kids against you, I'll take your finances. And at some point doing these things, and that person starts to go, okay, I see, this is so consistent. But the fifth thing is the important one. Know that there's nothing you will ever do that will cause them to have that aha moment or the epiphany. It has to come from them. And then you start to realize, I think when you put those things together, again, it's why this is considered this human magnet syndrome or it's breakup resistant, because the nice person will continue to try to give that person the aha moment. That person is not taking ownership or accountability of anything because they develop their sense of self by just being whoever they need to be in that moment that gives them that one up or one down position, And so every time you say, I think I get it, then they're like, oh, really? You do, huh? Or in that moment, they might say, you're right. I finally am going to change. And then that alleviates everybody's discomfort until it happens again. And so that, it just kind of repeats that cycle. So I start working with people and then they come in and they say, so I do these 5 things, then everything will be cool. And, first I feel like I was just kind of saying, sure. Yeah. But then really, if they do those things, they get to the point where, yeah, it's like, okay, I deserve better. This is something that I should not be a part of a human relationship. So I forgot the question. Yeah.
I love that.
Is this part? Was it the intervention?
No,
still?
I think you hit it. It was explaining narcissism versus emotional immaturity.
Yes.
We're not alone.
Like I say. Okay. So that I will make a very, very important point here. Now that I remember that. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you. So all right. So then when you get the emotional immaturity, narcissism, childhood defense mechanisms, this is the thing that I think is really fascinating. And I am giving you guys a breaking exclusive. So are you ready? So there's these nerdy concepts that come next. And it's so people that have these narcissistic traits or tendencies or emotional immaturity, they grapple with what we call whole object relations or object constancy. I don't know if you guys have talked about this so I'm trying to, again, here's the exclusive, redefining these terms. So this whole object relations is like having this well-rounded view of yourself and others. So it means that you recognize the good and bad sides of people, including yourself. And what I think is really interesting about this is I honestly have a little bit of a challenge with even the concepts of good and bad. I know that might sound a little bit goofy, but you recognize that people are doing and being themselves because that's who they are. And so then the whole object relation is being able to take that in, that's just what the person is doing. And so again, it's like I want to call it seeing the whole picture. So everybody, including ourselves, is this mix of strengths. And again, I don't even like calling them flaws. I feel like it's realizing that every person is this mixed bag of things, I guess, their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, their expressions. And then, so there can be things that you may find bothersome or annoying about a person, but you can see that whole picture. And then narcissist or emotionally immature people then struggle with this object constancy, which then is like described as, I think, keeping this emotional connection to somebody. So it's all about holding those positive feelings for somebody, even when they've done something that upsets you, because, if we want to skip right to the path of enlightenment and we get our yoga mat and our ponytail, that eventually at that top of that mountain of enlightenment, every interaction that you end up having with somebody is this amazing opportunity to self-confront. What can I learn from here? Why do I so desperately want to continue to engage with this person that doesn't hear me? Or why am I trying to beg for this person to love me? And, because it shouldn't be that difficult. So at some point everything becomes this opportunity for me to self-confront and grow. So the whole object relations, or basically, again, what I want to start redefining that is seeing this whole picture of a person. So again, a narcissist can't do this. And then keep this object constancy, or keeping this emotional connection. Because without that full picture of a person and then the emotional connection, then people with these narcissistic traits or tendencies only view people in black or white. So if you make them feel amazing, so everything they say and do is awesome, then you are awesome. But then if you even question anything between, even if you just say no, or really, why did you do that? Now they go to all or nothing, black or white thinking, and now you are worthless and you are defective. I mean, it's like watching a TV where it has two channels, and you're just turning back and forth between one or the other. So when you start recognizing in a relationship that either, okay, everything's great, and then it's horrible, and then it's great again, because when the narcissist then, gets angry with you, basically what they're doing is they now need to get rid of that discomfort, and they may need to, burn the village down behind them. Now they feel better, but you're left with, being called horrible things or that sort of, and then 5 minutes later they come in and say, so what's for dinner? And this is where I say on my podcast often, I call it hey, do you want to go ride bikes? Cause it's like being a little kid and you get in a fight, and then 5 minutes later, hey, do you want to go play? But then the kind person was just told horrible things about themselves. And so they don't want to go ride bikes. But then sometimes they feel like, well, he doesn't want to go ride bikes, so I should. And then all of a sudden that kind person is betraying their own feelings and emotions and gut reactions. And then that becomes part of this like internal struggle, I think. So there's my long-winded answer of the spectrum of narcissism. Again, a great alternative band.
Yeah, I like that. I think we should start that band.
Okay. All right. I'll play the tambourine or the triangulation. That's a thing in narcissism.
That's it.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
I'll play the triangle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Very punny.
Very punny. So how does someone who is exhibiting the narcissistic traits show up in a relationship? Like, why are they often so awful?
It's so interesting, because this is where that concept of like a trauma bond starts to creep in, because how do they show up? It's like they and I love the question, because now they show up without that, they don't see the whole picture. And so here, I love that you asked the question, because I'm saying, oh, so we must see the whole picture. That's emotional maturity. And then we can still keep the emotional connection. So then just look at the opposite of that. So how do they show up is if things are going, you start to recognize if everything's going okay, then with them, then everything's okay. Everybody's good. But then all of a sudden, if they're upset, now this is where I feel like the kind person in the relationship is like, okay, they're batting down the hatches, and I got a buffer for the kid. Hey guys, mom, dad, they're upset right now. So like, or they yell at the kid, and then the kind parent's like, it's okay. She's just having a bad day, or he's just off today. And so you find yourself kind of buffering or making excuses. And then if you try to have that conversation of, hey, I think that, that wasn't great with the kid, then they're not saying, you're right, and I lost it and I need help. It's like, well, if you would have helped them more in the day, then they wouldn't have done that. Or, well, do you know what he said to me? What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to tolerate that, and you start hearing those kind of things. And so there's just this, and then when you try to bring things up, that's, I feel like, when somebody's trying to give them the aha moment or this epiphany, when in a normal human relationship, we can bring something to somebody, and then they can look at it with curiosity. It might be uncomfortable, but they're willing to then have an adult conversation. And so I feel like that's the way it starts to show up. And then again, if you find yourself in relationships where you continually feel like you're crazy, and you've brought things up, and then all of a sudden that got turned around on me, and I didn't remember saying that. Maybe I did. And then you just start to then really feel like you aren't even sure if you want to bring things up with your spouse. Then I feel like those are the red flags, because this is where I like to just say that everybody can have their own thoughts and opinions and emotions, and that is absolutely okay. And so if you don't feel like you can start to express those, then there's a problem in the relationship. So it's time to get help. And then if your spouse doesn't want to, and they say, okay, well, you can work on it, you go get help, and that's okay, because that's where I feel like then somebody even trying to force a spouse into therapy as a couples therapist, that's not going to go well. And as a matter of fact, it can actually even make things worse, because if you really have an emotionally mature narcissist on your hands, now they're going to go in and most likely manipulate the therapist, or, and then they get to say, see, the therapist thought I was right. Or if they try to pretend in a session that, no, they're not who they are, man, unfortunately, then they leave the session and now they say, okay, that was ridiculous. You made me look bad. You shouldn't be saying those things. And so that's where you start to find out that couples therapy with an emotionally mature or a narcissistic person can actually be really damaging. And that's a whole other topic, because I find that a lot of the therapists that don't know how to work with this population can actually make things a little bit worse. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So how might we know if we are in a narcissistic relationship, whether it be with a person or an institution? Hint, hint, all the doctors out there, holler back at me. If we are, what next?
Well, it's so, if you really do start to feel like you are crazy, or if you start to feel like questioning your own sense of self or reality or worth, then I just can't stress enough that it's not you. I mean, it's okay for you to have your own thoughts and opinions. And that's why I'm so curious I want to hear you guys talk about what that looks like in your profession, because I just from seeing a little bit of some of the messages that we were trading back and forth, I appreciated when you were saying, okay, but whatever, like I don't know, medical narcissism or what you have to do in med school, or because I can understand, because I've had people talk about that in like military, where I have to do these exact things. I mean, because people's lives are on the line. And so I can really, I feel like that makes so much sense. And then, maybe that's a topic to come over on my podcast. And how do you maintain your autonomy, your sense of self, when there are ways that you really have to show up in a certain way? But this is, I think, to that question, Kendra, I think this is where I start to say, all right, this is where everybody goes into relationships, I think, emotionally immature and then enmeshed, codependent and enmeshed. And I do this with my hands. And so because we're little attachment based creatures, and we're afraid of being alone. And so we are so prey to the love bombing initially. And so we feel like, oh, we're just so similar and we're on the same page. And because maybe at first we're both playing a little bit of that game of where if somebody says, do you like sports? And the other person really doesn't, but I like this person and I don't want to be alone. So I'm like, yeah, I love it. And then I think to myself, I'll learn to love it. And so we, maybe we aren't even aware of how to just say, to be okay with the discomfort of, man, I really don't, but tell me what you like about them, that kind of thing. So then we get in there codependent and enmeshed, okay, now we go through life and I can only imagine things like med school, or people start to have kids, or they move, or there's financial things, and so now is when here you are, this codependent enmeshed little blob of a couple. And now you start to have your own thoughts and opinions, which is okay. So in a perfect world, you're growing now to be interdependent instead of codependent. And instead of enmeshed, you're differentiated, where the reason I like doing it with my hands is differentiation is where one person ends and the other begins. So I feel like accepting the fact that, oh, of course, yeah, we were the same on everything until we weren't. And now can we have those conversations? And because when you become differentiated, I like to say in the middle of that is a lot of invalidation. And that's where the growth really occurs. Or I like to say we're so afraid of contention in our relationship that we avoid tension altogether. And we just say it'll be better later. Maybe it'll make more sense when we get out of med school, or we start to make money, or we have kids, or, I get the cool car, or we have the house, or I get the 6-pack abs, or whatever. It'll be better then. And so we're kicking the can down the road. And then when we try to have adult conversations and they don't go well, and we do what's wrong with me, and I got to figure this out. And so then that's the way it starts to continually show up. So if you're seeing that and you have this inability to start to express your own thoughts and opinions, and it's okay again to have some tension, because it's going to be a little uncomfortable. But if you don't have a partner that is willing to self-confront or sit with some of that discomfort, or hear you and be able to even say, okay, man, I didn't realize that, or that makes me uncomfortable, then that's where you start to know that you are in a unhealthy relationship. And I like what you're saying. It's with a person or an entity, maybe. Because but I don't know what that looks like in your guys' profession. And that's got to be kind of fascinating.
Yes, that's a good word. It's fascinating.
Everyone stay tuned for part 2.
Right. Yeah, everyone stay tuned. A little warming up here. Tony, can you remind us what the definitions of confabulation and gaslighting are?
Yeah. So, I did the classic. It's funny. I go into story mode. I mean, because for confabulation, gaslighting, I mean, just by pure, a good old dictionary definition kind of does sum it up, where psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts or perceptions or reality. And then and when you're starting to be questioned all the time, what's really fascinating, and I feel like you guys as doctors would dig this, is or it's actually not something, it's sad, but then the concepts around if you've been gaslit long enough so that your memory is questioned continually. I have done a couple episodes on complex post-traumatic stress disorder where brain scans start to show it's the hippocampus that starts to shrink and the amygdala starts to enlarge. And if you really look at that, like the evolution of the way the brain works is your own brain saying, why send blood to the short-term memory organ, because my memory is continually questioned and I start to, but my fight or flight response is there and it's needed. So, but then when people get out of those unhealthy relationships, then eventually they, that can kind of reset. And I've got this private women's Facebook group that has been amazing. It's 600 women in there, and there's some people that are very knowledgeable about this area. And there's one, I think she's a trauma nurse, and do these group calls. And I've had her come on there a time or two and talk about all of the stuff she's seen of the way that your body shows up with long-term emotional abuse, where you start getting into those things like conversion disorders and chronic pain, and your adrenal glands are shot. I mean, all those kind of things that I would love to hear you guys talk about over on my podcast, because when people get out of those relationships, then they didn't even realize that was part of the body keeping the score, or what that trauma looks like. So anyway, that was a big old long thing about gaslighting. Confabulation is the most fascinating thing, because I think, once you understand confabulation, you can't unsee it. And I mean, and that's one where, so I don't know, if we've got plenty of time, I want to tell a very quick version of this story. So confabulation really is that, and I could go on and on about the mechanism of memory. Our memory is flawed. Our memory is adorable. We bring up a memory and then we fill it in with all the fillers, and then we put it back away. And that's what the memory is. So if I talk about going to Disneyland over Christmas, which I did, I had a great time and I loved everything about it. Yeah, the lines were long, but we played games and we were present, and we ate great. I ate so many churros. I ate every churro in Disneyland. They had all these themed churros. So then when I put the memory back away, now next time I bring it up, it's like, oh yeah, Disneyland, the fun place with all the churros. And then we played games in the lines. But if somebody has more of this negative disposition, oh, Disneyland. Yeah, the Airbnb was a little further away than I thought it was. And there was a little dip in the driveway, and we had to go over the car, crooked. And I worried that the rental car there would be damage. And so then I put the memory away. So then when we both went there, but now I think about it, and here's the memory that comes back. And every time I put it away, I pack it in with more good stuff. So then what the narcissist or emotionally mature person does is this concept of confabulation, is when they bring out the memory and it is uncomfortable, they pack it in with all these things of, it couldn't have been what you think it is. It had to have been this other way. And so then their reality, they confabulate in real time. They confabulate minute by minute. And so, if you said, man, you were never there you never showed up. You weren't there when I've had women say so many stories about women in birth, and the narcissist wasn't there because he didn't want to be, because he didn't. And he went, one where the guy went and grabbed food at a fast food restaurant, and he was just going to go do that real quick. And then we got on his phone, and then he didn't pay attention. And so when we've tried to have that conversation in couples therapy, it didn't happen that way. Couldn't have happened that way, because that would have meant he was a bad person. So now he can confabulate the narrative, and that narrative becomes real. That's why I talk about that mechanism of memory. So now it wasn't that way. And she keeps bringing it up that way. But, he was there. He just was in the other room, and she doesn't remember it. And as a matter of fact, he thought that she said that she didn't even want him in the room. I mean, so he's created this narrative. And so and that's where the gaslighting comes into play. So what's unfortunate is the narcissist confabulates this memory in real time, and then they believe it, because that has to be the way it was, or that would have meant he did something wrong. So when you try to then say that wasn't the way it worked, it couldn't have been that way. So that is what happened in his mind. And that's why people can gaslight so well. And you just think, but if I keep talking about it, they'll go, wait, maybe you're right. And that's the thing I think is, one of these people either don't know what they don't know, or if they've been confabulating since the day they were born, because that was a survival instinct or a defense mechanism, then it's, I hate to sound like there's no hope, but then you're not going to be able to talk that person out of what their memory was. And then they don't have those tools to sit with any discomfort or self-confront. So that's where the person just has to eventually just no contact or stop trying to even have those conversations. So that confabulation piece is wild. It's why, people, I throw out like the O.J. Simpson example of why I imagine he could pass a polygraph and a brain scan and whatever, and he couldn't have done it. And now to the point where it's like, well, he didn't. So if you ask him about it, it's, and that's all speculation, of course, of the confabulated piece. So I don't know if that makes sense, or if you guys, what do you think?
Yeah. So is confabulation the act, and then gaslighting, is it repeated over time?
Yeah,
maybe?
yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, yeah. And so, and when I talk about this, I've got this one video that I did, and I put it out, I think like on my TikTok or whatever. And but so I have a client that will come late, and then he'll say I'm going to be 5 minutes late, and then I think I'm hilarious. And if he comes 4 minutes late, then I say he's early late. And if he comes 6 minutes late, then he's late. So this was just a few weeks ago, and I've been talking about confabulation, and so then he says, "Hey, I'm going to be 5 minutes late," and I'm sitting right here, and he comes in my office, and then I look at 6 minutes after. I say, "You're late." He says, "I'm early late," and then we pull out our phones like it's a old west draw, and then what I love, and so this is why I mentioned this. I put this on I did a screenshot of it, and I showed that he actually said I'm going to be a few minutes late, but I was convinced. I knew he said 5, and I couldn't wait to show him, okay, you didn't say that. And he said later, he's like, no, I said 10 minutes late. And then we look and it said, I'm going to be a few minutes late. But if you would have, again, put me on the stand, polygraph or whatever, he said 5, because I had confabulated this narrative based on previous experiences that's what he says. So this is the part where you start to recognize that our memory is adorable and it means well, but this is why, and I know we won't probably have time to talk about this today, but I've got these 4 pillars of communication for healthy relationships. And one of them is that you can't tell the other person they're wrong or that's ridiculous, even if you think what they're saying is wrong or ridiculous, because we're basically just both going off of memory. And so when a couple is arguing in my office about it was Wednesday, no, it was Tuesday. Well, we were at the cabin. No, we were at the beach. That's where at some point I used to think, well, if we can figure out if it was Tuesday or Wednesday, then the rest will all fall into play. But then you realize, oh no, it doesn't matter. That's not what we're talking about. So then it's like, okay, anyway, if you thought it was Tuesday, then I can understand. But here's really the meat of the conversation. So that confabulation thing is really interesting. And if you watch interrogation videos, which my YouTube channel was full of for a while, you'll see this just worked so perfectly. Because if you have somebody that knows, a skilled investigator who now is interrogating a witness, and they have data that the witness doesn't know, then when they said, so where were you Thursday? And like, oh, I was at home. Okay, well, we've got this camera that shows you here. Oh, Thursday. I thought you said Wednesday. They just do it in real time. And it's really interesting. So yeah, I like what you're saying though, Amanda. The confabulation is kind of just what that person is, their sense of self almost, which then leads to the gaslighting, and why they absolutely believe that is what happened, and why they're so good at they're not going to give, because now you are crazy. Now go back into that world of emotional maturity and narcissism, and they really do now think you are crazy because it's not what happened, which then, it gives them more fuel, because you're the one that thought it was on a Wednesday. Like how silly. It was Tuesday,
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It's almost like a dissociation, because they have such a fragile ego. They cannot accept that they made a mistake, because the shame, the self-shame they flood onto themselves would just be incapacitating. And so they do this, like basically creating alternative realities just as a survival mechanism for themselves.
Yeah. Well, Laura, what's interesting about that too is I got to this point where when I feel like my own pendulum swung from when it went to the everybody's a narcissist, that then it really was when somebody would say to me, but I would say this thing, and I felt like for a minute he got it. And I was like, because later we're going to find out, oh no, it was manipulative or whatever. But when you really learn about confabulation, you can see that there might be a moment where the guy will say, wow, okay, that would be bad. And you see that little moment, but then it's like, in comes the confabulation. It's like, that's bad. Well, then I start to feel bad. And so then it's like, but if you would have told me, then I would have done it different. It's still your fault, and that's where that confabulation piece comes in. So, and sometimes you can watch it kick in a minute, or it might be the next day where, I actually got a text recently from a client, and they were, they sent me this big long text where they just said, oh no, she finally got it. She really did. But then by the next morning, then she was like, honestly, the more I think about it, I kind of really can't believe that this is what we're talking about. And if you would have only done this, and then he's like, oh, there it was. So, so I feel like it can either be immediate, or it still is just this scale of not being willing to sit with any discomfort. And so it couldn't have been them, and it's you, which is one of those leads to that concept of a narcissist apology. It's like, okay, fine. I'm sorry, I guess. Right. But, I can't believe we're having the conversation. Actually, if you would have done this different, then I probably wouldn't even have to do this. And so actually I'm kind of mad at you now for even bringing this up, then that doesn't go very well.
Right. Or I'm sorry your feelings are hurt. Or I'm sorry you feel that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think we need a whole separate podcast for 4 pillars of connected conversation.
Yeah.
So
good.
That's what we're gonna do for that.
Okay.
But tell us, what does it mean to raise your emotional baseline?
Yeah. So this is where it really, I like to say self-care is not selfish. And then I feel like self-care, again, we think that you have to go start a new career or, join a gym or run a marathon. And those are great things. But I just feel like when somebody, I like to start bringing in this concept of emotional calories burned and trying to figure out what is wrong with me. How do I make sense of this? How do I convince him? How do I protect the kids? And all those things just zap your emotional calories and lowers your baseline. So then any bit of self-care helps. I don't care if it's 1 minute of breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, anything you're doing that isn't ruminating, worrying, trying to, fixate and it's for yourself is going to raise that emotional baseline. And this is one of those where I think I mentioned earlier that I will admit forever that I made this concept up, but I feel like it is field tested now for well over a decade of, it just moves the ball forward a little bit for somebody to just have any bit of traction that isn't, I feel like this is so much exponentially better to have somebody just being and doing something for themselves than worrying and ruminating and kind of just that emotional calories burned. And so then the reason I set it up that way is I also own that I have no data to back this up. And I'm talking to literally 3 doctors who can prescribe medication. So when people say to me, I don't want to take medication, should I take medication for depression or anxiety or anything? Then this is where I often will say, okay, well, if your baseline is so low that you can't, and they're coming to see me and I can't get them to start a mindfulness practice. I can't get them to even just go on a walk. I can't get them to just think or dream or hope. Then sometimes I feel like a medication will bump your baseline up just enough that you can now reach the tools. And once you can start working the tools, now it'll raise your baseline up even more. So if the person then says, I don't want to be on this forever, then okay, no worries. Then let's just use medication to get you to the place where you can access tools, use the tools to get your baseline even higher. And then at that point, if you then want to get off the medication, then your baseline might dip a bit, but you've got those tools and we can work for, we can look at that. But then a lot of times that when people then get on a medication that will really help them raise that baseline, then they'll start to realize, oh, I didn't even know I could feel this way. Then it's like, well, why would I get off the medication if it's really working for me? And so anyway, so I love your thoughts on that. Cause again, I have no data to back that up, but I find that seems to work well. Cause when people's baselines are so low, then they're saying things like, well, I shouldn't have to take a sleep aid. I shouldn't have to take an antidepressant, or I don't want to. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, that's what it's going to feel like when your baseline's so low that you can't access the tools that you need to move forward. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And we see it, especially when we're dealing with our clients who are feeling burnout in their jobs, they're not wanting to throw away this career they've worked so hard for, but really they are experiencing a lot of challenges. And we say that burnout is 80% of it is institutional and 20% of it is us. And that's what we work on with our clients. And that is that raising the emotional baseline, because if you aren't doing the part that you can to keep yourself healthy, to keep yourself mentally, physically, spiritually well, you're not going to have any chance at staying in this career that is kind of stacked against us in terms of wellness. So, I think you're not making it up. It's absolutely right. It's kind of like I don't think that there's randomized controlled trials about penicillin working. It's just been there so long that we know it works. So
I like that, Laura. I'm going to now, you'll hear me then. Now, so let's go back to confabulation. I will now create a confabulated narrative where give me 6 months and I'll be like, like I've always said, penicillin, hasn't, and then, right. And then people look back on this and then I'll gaslight them and hilarity will ensue. But I will tell you, one of the things I think is interesting. And I love the fact that I'm talking to 3, women that are medical professionals, that are doctors, is I still remember one of the first times I feel like field testing the emotional baseline theory was a woman coming to me who, from a high demand religion. And she said, I know I should not want to work. I know that is wrong. I'm like, okay, says who? And then I start throwing the emotional baseline out and I'm like, okay, but if you feel if you like going to work and that gives you the strength and the validation and you feel like that is what your calling is, and it gives you a real sense of self and purpose, then do you come home now baseline raised, and now I'm in a better position to interact with my kids? She's like, absolutely. And then that just, I've used that so many times because, if I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom, but I have to. Now I'm getting into the world of, it's called the socially compliant goal. It's from acceptance and commitment therapy. So if that isn't what really matters to me, then my motivation is weak and ineffective because it goes against like my sense of self, my process of unfolding. So now I'm just having a day long full of experiential avoidance. Okay, I've got another hour. What are we going to do now? And that person is losing their sense of self. So if they are going and to work and raising their emotional baseline, then they're coming home and they are just on fire. And they may be now, sending the kid to somebody that what their sense of purpose is to work with kids. So holy cow, what a positive on both fronts. And then kids get their whole sense of self from external validation. So if their sense of self is watching mom kind of manage her day to try to get through it, then they start to then take on that. Okay, I don't want to upset mom, But if it's like mom comes home and she's on fire, and then the kid's at a caregiver that like, hey, I love doing this, then I feel like that kid's sense of self is going to be based off of this. Oh, I can just be me. I can just be and do. I'm not trying to manage anybody's emotions. So anyway, I thought about that when I was going to come on and talk with you guys, because I feel like that's one of the first times I really talked about the emotional baseline in practice, and I've had a chance to interact with that lady 13 years later. And yeah, she loves her career and her kids are well adjusted and it's good,
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So this is part 1 of this podcast series, but if anyone can't wait until part 2 to get more Tony Overbay, which I highly encourage you to. Tony, you're putting out lots of great content all the time, including your Path Back course and marriage courses. How can people find you?
Yeah, right now, just go to tonyoverbay.com, and hopefully by the time people start to look at this, it will not just be a big old picture of me on the front. I'm trying to redo that whole thing. But yeah, I've got a lot of content. And so I have the podcast, the virtual couch, and Waking Up to Narcissism. I've got a Waking Up to Narcissism premium question and answer that's $5 a month through Apple Podcast. And then that money goes to this help women in relationships with emotionally immature and abusive people to try to pay for the counseling and the court fees and those kind of things. So that's where I try to get a little bit of, I'm the world's worst salesperson, but that's there. And then, yeah, I've got the Path Back, which is an addiction recovery program that I really feel happy about. I've got a private women's Facebook group, and I'm starting up a men's group as well for men that feel like they're either waking up to their own emotional immaturity, or they're in relationships with maybe the more narcissistic or emotionally immature women. And then that Murder on the Couch podcast, which is I've got 3 episodes out at the time of this recording. It's with my daughter, who's hilarious. And that's like the funnest thing in the world. So, but you can just go to tonyoverbay.com or find me on Instagram. And actually that same daughter is putting out all my TikTok content. And that's hilarious because I don't know, I thought I didn't care about that, but then it's grown and gone kind of nuts and fun. And so I guess I'm a TikTok therapist as well. So you can find me at Virtual Couch there.
So thank you, Tony, for this awesome wrap on episode 1. We look definitely forward to episode 2. And if you're interested in working with us, go to our website, www.thewholephysician.com, to find out more information, and follow us on the socials for great content. So until next time, you are whole, you are a gift to medicine, and the work you do matters.